So in recognition and memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you joined us in this responsive reading, recognizing that in the days, months, and few years ahead of us, there may be concerns. And again, you remember this commitment that you made the day before inauguration, that we will continue to answer the call of love. May it be so. My background is in the arts. I taught art for many years, and then I was the director of an art gallery, and then I was the director of a statewide arts organization called Hoosier Salon. It's a very old organization from 1924 in Indiana. And so this is before, well, actually I was going to seminary for part of this time, but I was working at the Hoosier Salon, not for profit, and I hired a new administrative assistant. She was wonderful. I was so excited. One day I said to her, wow, it must have been really difficult to raise money for the Indianapolis Zoo. How did you do it? She was a fundraiser. Oh, she said, that was a very easy job. Actually, raising money for the Riley Children's Hospital, that was the difficult job. And I said, what? Really? I can't imagine that people wouldn't want to give money to help sick children. Tell me how it differed from raising money for the zoo and raising money for children. My new assistant administrator proceeded to explain it this way. People believe that animals are innocent. Therefore, they should be fed and nurtured. Whereas with sick children, she says, for better or for worse, this is what I noticed, there is an undercurrent of thought among many people, granted most won't admit it, that the child is someone else's responsibility. For example, if the child is born with a defective heart, it's because of something the mother did to cause it, or perhaps it is a defective gene or someone else's family. The point is, said my new assistant, when a child is sick, it is perceived as someone else's problem. I said loudly, what kind of a person would think that? I was shocked. I was disheartened. I wrestled with this information all these years later. I'm still wrestling with the information. I was deeply troubled and, also swimming in a sea of judgment about humanity. I said aloud, aren't children just as innocent as animals? Certainly no less important. My assistant flinched. She said, down, woman. I'm answering your question. Don't get all up in my face in my answer. So as I mentioned, I was in seminary, and every seminary, or UU seminaries as well, the first year or two, you are talking about First Testament, formerly called Old Testament, New Testament, First and Second. You kind of explore the writings from there. So I thought about this a passage in the Bible. I heard it in my youth. Regarding the 10 Commandments, Exodus 26 reads, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of their fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who love and keep my commandments. Has this ancient idea really permeated the mindset of contemporary Americans? What about the suffering of the innocent, such as babies? Is judgment of this sort really what we, a country of faith-filled citizens, are called to do, to instinctively judge a person or a circumstance and then withhold assistance? Maybe this thought process is not biblically related. Perhaps we all have a thread of judgment residing in the marrow of our bones, a little bit. For examples, might we say to ourselves, if that man hadn't smoked, he wouldn't have cancer. It's his fault he can no longer work and provide for his family. It's not my responsibility. To judge is to avoid helping those who are experiencing difficulty. To judge gets us off the hook. the idea of assessing the cause of another person's pain or circumstance gets in the way of compassionate action. The idea of, I want to dig a little deeper this morning. I want to explore some perceptions of suffering. So on a Sunday morning, one of the values of coming in a service like this is we get to dig a little deeper in the deeper subjects. You don't often have these conversations. Why do you suppose people suffer at a lunch at a local cafe, right? We do the important discussions in our faith communities. On a Sunday morning, here we speak of that which has worth. We all know that bad things happen to good people, and religion is often asked to sort out the reasons for this reality. On a fundamental, basic level, we naturally want to know why. Why did I get sick when I never smoked? Why did my loved one have dementia, cancer, or a bad accident? Even children ask why things are the way they are. A little boy asked Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, why did God put all the vitamins in spinach and not in ice cream? I hate spinach. I always wonder. That's the answer, Pan says. Life is so wonderful. Why must it be mucked up? By the way, I said mucked up, not the F word. Why does it have to be mucked up with bad things? One of the misguided perceptions for why bad things happen is that God punishes wicked people, including those who, quote, have not accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Ouch. However, one very poignant story that actually made it into the First Testament, or the Old Testament in the biblical collection, is the story of Job, who lost everything. Maybe you remember this story or have heard it before. He lost his home, he lost his work, he lost his family, he lost his health. He wrestled with God, and even when he was told by well-meaning people, maybe friends and neighbors, that he needed to repent for his sins, he continued to profess that he did nothing to deserve this kind of suffering. Now, the traditional answer for suffering did not make sense to Job. He used reason, and he spoke his mind. Granted, there are 100 interpretations and even versions of this story, but for me, my takeaway is that suffering happens often with no explanation. It just is. Researchers believe the story of Job was included in the collection of writings created after Jesus' death and over many years, and implies that sometimes bad things happen with no reason and for no repercussion or bad behavior or troubled mindset or sin. In the New or Second Testament, Jesus repudiates the identification of suffering tied to punishment. When he was asked whether a certain man's blindness was caused by the man himself or by his parents, Jesus purportedly said, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned." Human suffering, he was saying, is not the result of God's punishment for wrongdoing. Reverend William Murray, American humanist, author, Unitarian Universalist minister, and former president of Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago, one of our Unitarian Universalist focused seminaries, by the way, said, "I know there are both psychological and theological reasons for the persistence of the view of suffering as punishment." He said, psychologically, it's a way of dealing with the guilt every person feels, for if suffering is a punishment for sin, then there must be a way to atone for sin, to be a better person, and then the suffering will stop. Think about it. There is a cause and effect. If challenging things are arising in life when we are suffering, then we look to a cause or a reason. If there is a cause outside of our understanding, then it must be because, quote, God is punishing us for our bad thoughts or our actions, unquote. The theological aspect of suffering has to do with the concept of a just universe. If goodness is rewarded, so Murray thought, if goodness is not rewarded and evil is not punished, it is difficult to maintain that we live in a just, fair, and orderly cosmos. And if the universe is not just, then what does it say about belief in God? If while in our living moments people are not punished and we are not rewarded, then it surely must happen upon death, when reward and punishment will occur, making all actions just. If we view suffering from a biblical perspective that's not focused on punishment, we find other ideas regarding suffering. First, Murray said, there's the notion that suffering is a test of faith. However, if one views suffering from this perspective, it begs the question, what kind of God would put people to such a test as incurable cancer and other painful diseases or the death of innocent children? This doesn't make sense. This idea raises many questions about God's goodness and justice. One thread in Unitarian Universalism, our beloved tradition, is if there is a God or gods, it would not be a force that causes suffering in any form. God would be too good to condemn anybody to death or distress. That is a value, a belief that Unitarian Universalists hold dear. Secondly, there is the idea that suffering is the work of God's archenemy, the devil, which raises more inquiries. For if God created all things, including the devil, then God is ultimately responsible for evil and suffering. That doesn't make sense either, does it? Thirdly, Murray pointed out one of the more prevalent justifications of suffering is the view that the balance will be put right after death. If there is injustice in this life, it will be corrected upon death. So this idea might help one to endure when life is tough, and this notion has made and still makes living tolerable for many, including those who are oppressed and those who were enslaved. The thought is, quote, this life is cruel, but those oppressing me now will pay for it in the afterlife. Now maybe not. We don't, in our limited cognitive understanding, really know what happens upon death, right? Finally, there is the idea that a belief in suffering is redemptive. If one has transgressed or sinned, perhaps by suffering, one can be relieved of that guilt. In fact, suffering is purification for the original wrong action. It's the raw responsibility related to doing something one knows caused pain, and now one will suffer to redeem oneself of the wrongdoing. Some of us in this room are theists, Christian or otherwise, who are trying to reconcile faith in God with why bad things happen. Others are not theists. The role of God is not the focus. It is more about this question: how can we help one another with this ever-present mystery of why bad things happen? How can we be there for each other? From a non or a theist view, or atheist view, some adhere to the idea that human choice is a cause for suffering. One realizes the choice has an effect on one person's life or the lives of others in relationship to the person. Freedom to choose how to live is a gift, but is also an incredible responsibility burdened with its own perils when it comes to discernment regarding the cause of suffering. For example, quote, if I drink and drive and cause an accident, harming myself or another, it will forever be my choice. It will be my fault because it was my choice. Viewing suffering this way implies that one has the capacity to cause suffering and is irresponsible. But I want to point out, we're all doing the best we can. We're imperfect human beings, right? We do the best we can. Whether one perceives God or not, our perception of suffering should include the understanding that we can be humane or inhumane to one another. We come to realize the perversity and malice that exists in human nature, and that self-centeredness can cause suffering. In an old movie titled Oh God, you remember, some of you maybe remember Oh God, George Burns, who played God, defended himself by saying, I did not create evil. I didn't create evil. I gave you humans a perfectly good world, and you all are messing it up. Much suffering is caused by nature. It is just so, and part of nature too. And yet, someone this week said regarding the wildfires, Mother Nature is furious with humanity for acts of injustice to our precious earth. There is actually a cause and effect proven by science in this statement, and yet hurricanes, fires, tsunamis, and earthquakes are not sent by God as punishment. And yes, we can talk about the role of humanity in global warming, and we should, since the situation is more dire than ever. But we also have to acknowledge that throughout history, storms have raged, earthquakes have shaken the ground, causing death, injury, and destruction. Accepting that, again, Murray points out, some suffering is due to circumstances over which we have no control, and that can be consoling. If, for example, we know that schizophrenia and alcoholism are genetically based, it is comforting to know that it was not the nature of our parenting that caused our child to have an illness, schizophrenia, or to become an alcoholic. There are things for which someone is responsible, and it's important to recognize real responsibility, but it's also true that there are things for which no one is responsible. It's important to recognize that too, and to know the difference so that we can do something about the things that we can control. So, from the perspective of a reasoning theist, God becomes the creative power, the life force with humankind that pushes us and others in the world toward health, unity, wholeness, compassion, love, and purposeful living. For many of us, God is just that, the creator of beauty, the pull towards right relationship or skilled love in relationship and sweet communion with life. Whether you're a theist, embracing the term God, life force, or universe, or a non-theist who is not focused on the God of others' understanding, you and I are present to proclaim that suffering exists, and as it manifests itself, we have the capacity to ease pain and suffering, especially in the context of pastoral care, or care related to being summoned to care by one's faith or spiritual practice. Somebody asked me one time when I used that term pastoral, and they said, "What do you mean by pastoral care? Is it like being a shepherd in a field of sheep, keeping them safe and well fed?" I said, well, caring for others, sure, is like a shepherd. Friends and members are not sheep of our Unitarian Universalist communities. They don't follow anything or anyone. A minister's role is more like providing care and support for a yard filled with feral cats, meowing sometimes loudly and darting here and there all over the place. Mind you, when I say feral cats, that I love feral cats because I'm one too. So I do want to pause for a moment. We do have individuals here who are here to provide support in case of somebody might need a little help or a listening ear. Would those who are on the Pastoral Associates Committee, would you please rise so that our individuals online and here can see who you are? Thank you. Thank you for being willing to pick up on the pastoral care line on the telephone. Thank you. These are good listeners who can be of support. Here's a true real life response to a circumstance of pastoral assistance in a UU church setting. So I say church because the congregation there was titled church. They chose to use church. Unitarian Universalists of Clearwater at one time had church as the title, and then realizing the diversity, the mix of atheist, theist, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, congregation was a better fit, or just plain Unitarian Universalists of Clearwater. The difference for newcomers who might know, is this a church or not? What is it to you? Is this your church? Great. Is this your congregation? Great. You say that. This my congregation. If you don't want to mess with either one of them, in my faith-based community, I belong here. You can use all of those, and it's all correct. So I'm not going to use real names in this story. I'm going to call this woman Marla. Marla was divorced. She was in her mid-20s, raising a child on her own. She was impoverished, living with her mother. Marla fell in love with a man who was near her age, and the two were married. Now, he was new to the area and couldn't find a job in his field of education. He was schooled as a chef. However, he found a job that paid minimum wage. Marla had enrolled in college and worked part-time. They lived with her mother, barely making ends meet, but they did it for 1 year, believing that someday he would get a job as a chef, and she would be a teacher. She was going to college when she met Stan. So the two soon moved out of her mother's trailer. But then Marla's mother, we're going to call her Fran, found out that she had cancer and the prognosis was not good. Marla got pregnant right away because, as Marla told me, I want my mother to know my second child. She knows my first child, but Stan and I wanted to have a child, and we did it early because I wanted her to know my child. Marla completed one more semester of school, then put schooling on hold. Marla and Stan had to take government assistance. During Marla's pregnancy, a member of the pastoral care team at the Unitarian Universalist Church realized the couple, who were very active members, needed support for their new arrival. They needed clothing and diapers, a car seat, and more. So the pastoral care team scheduled a baby shower. They began announcing the date and the time of the shower. One member of the congregation came to me and said, I will not support a family who cannot afford to have a child. I will not support a couple who are intent on bringing another mouth to feed into their home when they can barely feed the child they have. Furthermore, it's not my job in this faith community to acknowledge this couple's bad judgment with a baby shower. Look, cognitively, we understand the point this woman was making, and yet, what's wrong with this picture? What is wrong with this person? What kind of a person? Let that go. This issue is not about Fran, the mother, a former smoker who had cancer. It's not about Marla and Stan and baby and government assistant. It's not about a congregation member concerned with enabling a couple who, in her mind, was making a bad decision. This story is about people in a faith community who see a family in need. It's about a group seizing an opportunity to build community and to strengthen relationships, to allow older individuals who have raised their own families to share in the life of a couple who also have a dream of a family of their own. It's about a daughter who desperately wants her mother to be part of the new happy chapter in her life. Finally, it's about one person who won't participate in a celebration because she's making a judgment about another member of her own faith community. It's my view that the woman is missing the real point. You see, to do something that is to touch the life of another person is to realize that in that effort to express care and compassion, it won't be the receiver of your kindness that will benefit. It will more than likely be you, the giver, who will experience transformation. Transformation, that's one of our values that we Unitarian Universalists cherish. Transformation within ourselves. My message to you this morning is this. There are folks all around us in this room, on Zoom, in this neighborhood, city, state, in the world, awaiting to provide us, you and me, moments of astonishment in the context of deeper understanding and ultimately transformation. Transformation. This morning in all things, it is my hope that you will allow yourself to be transformed by compassion, to withhold the shackles of assessment. In the words of Nike marketing campaign of years past, just do it. Just love one another. May it be so.